Amos chapter 3 is where we're starting, and it starts off just identifying something about God's people. I really hope to get from 3 through 5 today, by the way. Something about God's people. Now, last week as we went through the book of Amos, the first 2 chapters had to do with judgments, right? God is going to judge the nations. For 3 sins, or even for 4, he will not relent. God is not going to hold back his judgments when it comes to judging those nations which surround Israel. And that's a big deal because we looked at what those nations were doing and we found out that God cares deeply about the sanctity of life. He cares about people, and the nations surrounding Israel were treating people harshly. They were selling people off into slave trade. They were tearing open the wombs of pregnant women and ripping children out. They were burning the bones of dead kings because God cares about the whole person from birth to death. God cares about the sanctity of human life. And the nations around Israel were treating people as if they didn't matter. And so Amos comes and he begins to talk to the people of Israel about the judgments that God is going to pour out on those nations. And every one of them has to do with God burning with his fire the walls of each nation, because the walls weren't going to be able to save them from the army God was going to send. And we looked in those judgments, and hopefully, like me, you realized how much God cares about people. But the nation of Israel, as they listened to those judgments, would have clapped their hands and been excited because we want to see those people over there be judged for the things that they're doing wrong. And they were doing some things that were really wrong. And so Israel would have been celebrating because God is going to take care of the sin of Edom and Damascus, and he's going to go after them. But then Amos turns it around and starts talking about Israel. And he condemns Israel for 3 sins, and even for 4, he's not going to hold back his wrath against Israel because Israel had the law, yet they didn't obey the law. They knew God's decrees, yet they didn't follow God's decrees, right? Just like many Christians today. You guys have, holding in your hand, God's word. You know what his decrees are. The question is, are we following those decrees out? Are we being obedient to God? See, the nation of Israel was not being obedient. They were suppressing people. Amos talks about the way that they treated people is as if they were walking on people as if they were the dust of the ground, right? Everybody was beneath them. They had a problem with poverty, with justice. That's a big word that Amos talks about, is justice. And what justice means is to make things right? And God's going to come back and he's going to make things right for those who have been oppressed, those who have been pushed down. He's going to make things right. And for that reason, justice has 2 different angles to it, right? You have justice as in restoration, and then you have justice as in judgment, right? And God's the one who comes back to judge. So we saw in that even the nation of Israel, although they could claim to be God's people, didn't live as if they were God's people. They had all the words that God had given them. They knew how they were called to live, but they didn't live as if they were God's people. And so God is going to even judge them. And at the very beginning part of chapter 3, we get this word of the Lord. It says, "Hear this word, people of Israel. The word of the Lord has spoken against you, against the whole family I brought out of Egypt. You only have I chosen of all the families on the earth. Therefore I will punish you for all of your sins." That's a big thing because we looked at the other nations and God was going to punish them because of the sins against crimes against humanity. But Israel was held to a higher standard because they had the law, they had the prophets, they knew what was right and they knew what was wrong. And so Israel is going to be punished for all of their sins. See, because when we have more knowledge, God expects some things out of us, right? God expects us to live according to his standards, according to his decrees. And God had chosen Israel, and he told them, this is how I want you to live. And if you live this way, things are going to go really well for you. And if you don't live this way, guess what? It's not going to go so well. Let's look at that verse in Deuteronomy chapter 28. This is God whenever he made a covenant with the people of Israel. And he said to them, if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all of my commands that I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above the nations of earth. See, they were supposed to be a light to all the nations that surrounded them, as long as they were obeying God's word. He says this in verse 2, all the blessings will come to you and accompany you if you obey the Lord. Verse 3 says, you will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed in the crops of your land and the young livestock, the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flocks. See, God was going to bless them if they were obedient and lived according to his decrees. But God flips the coin on them in chapter 28. Verse 14, it says, however, that's that big word, that transition word, right? If you obey me, things are going to go really well for you. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow his commands and decrees I'm giving you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. You'll be crushed in the city and crushed in the country. Your baskets and your kneading troughs will be cursed. The fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land and the calves of your herds and the lambs and all your flocks. You'll be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. So God had told the people of Israel, you're my people. I chose you out of Egypt, and I've given you my decrees, and I've told you how you're supposed to live. And as long as you obey my commands, what's going to happen? You're going to be blessed in everything that you do. And that usually works out for us, because when we live according to God's commands, things tend to work out for us, right? That doesn't mean that we're not going to go through trials. We're not going to go through tribulation. We're going to have times of trouble, but it's not going to be because we made the mistake. We're being obedient to God, right? Now, if we stop living according to his commands, stop obeying what God has told us to do, well, then there's going to be hardships that come. And usually those hardships come just because they're a product of our own sin. I mean, who in here has ever done something really stupid and then had to pay the consequence for it? Right? That's me. Like, I do stupid things and I have to pay the consequence for it. And so what God is saying here to the people of Israel is, you're my covenant people. If you obey my commands and do what I say, things are going to go well for you. If you don't obey my commands, you're going to have to pay the consequences of the things you do wrong. Right? That's the covenant that God set up with the people. And Amos talks about that, and he says, you only, out of all the people in the world, I've chosen you in chapter 3. You only have I chosen, and I expected great things out of you, but because you didn't do great things. Now remember, what's the problem with Israel? They lack justice. They oppress those who they consider as less than them, and they oppress them. And so God says, I'm going to punish you for all of your sins. So we're going to look at Israel. We're going to kind of consider what it was about them that was causing them to be in such sin. And what I want you to see is my first point, that surface religion hides authentic faith. And we're going to see this in chapter 4. A surface level religion hides authentic faith. And I want you to turn to chapter 4 and just go to verse 4. Right? Amos comes to the people of Israel and says something that we wouldn't expect God to say. He says, go to Bethel and sin. Now, just a question. Do you think God is being like sarcastic here? Like, do you think God is really egging them to go to Bethel and sin? No, he's not. He's saying that if you go to Bethel, that's what's going to happen. You're going to sin. Now, the reason that going to Bethel would be a sin would be because the people were supposed to worship in Jerusalem, right? Now, remember, this is a northern kingdom area, and they were supposed to worship in Jerusalem, but they decided it's easier for them, it's more convenient if they just go to Bethel, right? And so they had this surface level religion that was just about what is convenient, what is easy, what can I benefit the most? In fact, what makes me look good? And so Amos comes to him and says, go to Bethel and sin, go to Gilgal and sin yet more, right? He's being sarcastic. Bring your sacrifices every morning and your tithes every 3 weeks. Now, this is an over-exaggeration. They weren't supposed to sacrifice every morning, right? What he's saying is that you go ahead and try to worship in this over-exaggerated way and see if it works. He says, burn leavened bread. Now, they were supposed to have unleavened bread, right? Burn leavened bread as a thank offering and brag about your free will offerings. Boast about them, you Israelites, for this is what you love to do. See, they had this surface level religion, and what they were looking for was reasons to boast. That's why Amos says, go ahead and boast about your free will offerings. Go ahead and brag about them, right? Because they had a surface level religion that had no depth to it. And when you have that shallow faith, God's going to do things to bring you back. I have a friend that I was talking to over the last couple weeks, and he was going through a problem. like I would call it like a trumpet. He was going through an issue in his life that was a little bit hard to deal with. And he had attended another church, and then he quit going after a while. And I was talking to him in the typical way that people talk today. I was doing it through like Facebook Messenger. But like we were talking to each other, and he said to me, like, I'm looking for a church, right? And I said, well, what's the matter with the one you used to go to? And he said, well, I left that church because it's too old. Right? That was his answer. It's too old. Now I'm telling you, this church is a lot younger than our church. But like that church is just too old. I can't go to that church. I need a church that's going to represent me. A church that's going to be about youth. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying young churches are bad churches, but it's not good just because it's young, right? Like this is a surface level thing. And the people of Israel were really good at the surface level of faith, the surface level of what it meant to practice their faith. It was all about them. How does this worship service bring glory to me? How can I brag about it, right? And so God was not pleased because although they went to worship, they did it in the wrong way and their heart was not right. And remember when I read from Deuteronomy, it says, as long as you're obeying my commands, what's going to happen? And if you stop obeying my commands, what's going to happen? Curses. And so God gives them curses all the way from verse 6 all the way down through verse 13. Let's look at verse 6. I gave you empty stomachs in every city and a lack of bread in every town. Right? God disciplines those he loves. He gives them. Anybody's Bible say, I gave you clean teeth? Yes? That's what the actual Hebrew says. I gave you clean teeth and a lack of bread. Because at that time, we didn't, like when Amos wrote this, he was, clean teeth was a symbol that you hadn't eaten much. In fact, if you had dirty teeth, like if you had food stuck in your gums, then that guy's living pretty good, right? So God's saying, I gave you clean teeth and a lack of bread. But you didn't return to me, right? Yeah, you didn't return to me. I also withheld rain from you. When the harvests were still months away, I sent rain on one town and withheld it from another. One field had rain, another had dried up. People staggered from town to town for water, but you did not get enough to drink. Yet you have not returned to me. See, God disciplines those he loves, and he told them how this would work all the way back in Deuteronomy. As long as you're obeying my commands and doing what I'm telling you, like what I've told you to do, as long as you're doing those things, life is going to go well for you. You stop doing these things, and it's not going to go well for you. Why? Because the Father disciplines the one he loves, and God is trying to bring these people back. Every time he sends them clean teeth, he's hoping they'll come back. When they lack water, it's because he's hoping that they come back. See, in verse 9, many times I struck your gardens and vineyards, destroying them with blight and mildew. Locusts devoured the fig and olive trees, yet you did not return to me. Like God is sending them these things so that they'll come back. He's not destroying them. He's hoping that by sending these things that they will come back because the Father disciplines the ones he loves. In verse 11, it says, I overthrew some of you as I overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. You were like burning sticks, snatched from the fire, yet you have not returned to me. I wonder how many times things happen in our life that is God trying to get your attention. Because you're not living according to his decrees or following his standards. How many times does God send something in your life that you think, oh man, why is this going on? And really it's just about getting you to come back to him. And yet you don't return. See, that's what I think is going on in my friend's life. He had this, what I call trumpet, but it was this thing that happened in his life that made him want to go back to church. Of course, the church he was looking for it's got to be young. That's what's important. Because it's surface level, it's shallow, right? And God is saying, no, it's not about those shallow things. I want you to live the way that I've commanded you to live. I want you to obey all the things that I've told you to do. And so every time God disciplines his son, every time he sends one of these trumpet blasts, the people do not return to him. And so the last thing that he says that he's going to do in verse 12, it says, therefore, this is what I will do to you, Israel. And because I will do this to you, Israel, prepare to meet your God. That's the last thing, right? Prepare to meet your God. I've tried to get your attention in other ways. That's not going to happen. So now guess what? You're going to have a face-to-face encounter with God. Now the book of Amos is a pre-Assyrian prophet, so he's preaching or teaching or prophesying prior to the exile, right? So maybe when he's saying prepare to meet your God, maybe that's like, I'm going to send Assyria on you. They're going to pull you into exile, and you're going to realize how dependent you need to be on God. Maybe that's what he's talking about. I also think that it's really like a beautiful way of considering the scripture is to understand that Jesus is the exact representation of God on earth, right? And so we actually get to see God in the person of Jesus. Like that's God's final attempt. He's tried to get your attention, to get your attention, to get your attention. You didn't listen, so he sends Jesus. Prepare to meet your God. The point is that however you think you can run away from God, it's not going to work. At some point, you're going to come face to face with God. And I really believe that if you have a shallow faith, the one thing that's going to make it deep is when you stand before God on Judgment Day. Right? That's going to provide some depth to your shallow faith. Here's the God that he's talking about. This is, I really like when Amos describes God, because listen to what he says. He forms the mountains and creates the wind. See, that's a God, right? He forms the mountains and creates the wind, and who reveals his thoughts to mankind. There's not one person here that can say they don't know what God wants. Because you're all holding in your hand, at least most of you are holding in your hand the very words of God. He has revealed to you his thoughts to mankind. And you can't say, I didn't know. What you can say is, I didn't read. What you can say is, I didn't study. What you can say is, I didn't bother. But no one will be able to stand before God on that day and say, I didn't have a chance. Right? Because God is the one who creates the mountains and the winds and reveals his thoughts to mankind, and who turns dawn to darkness and treads on the heights from the earth. The Lord God Almighty is his name. You want to know the God that they're going to come face to face with? It's the God Almighty. And I'm telling you, when you stand before God, shallow faith is not going to work. Because God is looking for a really authentic type of faith. And he will try to get your attention to bring you back to an obedient relationship. But at some point, if you refuse him, prepare to meet your God. And this is the Lord Almighty. He's powerful. My second point is that we have an opportunity to seek God and live. And he'll repeat this over and over again. Look, it starts in chapter 5, right in verse 4. This is what the Lord says, Israel. Seek me and live. Now, I want you to understand what it means to seek God, because for the people of Israel at this time, when Amos is saying, this is what I want you to do, I want you to seek God, he's basically telling them, go to a holy place. Inquire of a prophet. Like, seek God, and maybe, you'll learn what to do. So in a very real way, Amos is saying, like, listen to what I have to say to you. If you listen, if you seek and listen to what I have to say to you, you're going to live, right? Today, we are even more blessed than they were there because we have the words of the prophet, right? That's one thing. You're all picking up the book of Amos, and so you get to hear his message. And one thing I love about the prophets is it reveals a part of God that we really see in Christ. Right? Like if you look at Amos, we're finding a God that cares very deeply about justice and the sanctity of life. But we have the prophets, right? We have the Holy Scriptures. Peter talks about them and says, Paul talks about them to Timothy and says, they're useful for teaching, correcting, rebuking. Like we have those Holy Scriptures. We have the person of Jesus in the Gospels. You want to know what it means to seek God? Look at the picture of Jesus in the Gospels, because he is the exact representation of who God is. Seek that person and live. Seek Jesus and live. And then in the book of Hebrews, it tells us that Jesus, in the past, God used to speak to us through prophets and in various ways. But in these last times, he speaks to us through his Son, Jesus Christ. And so what does it mean for us to seek God and live? It means to go after that person of Jesus, to pick up the Scripture, to learn from it. But Amos warns them. He says, seek God and live, but don't seek Bethel, right? Don't seek him in Bethel. Why? Because God had told them they're supposed to worship in Jerusalem. And they wanted to do what was convenient. It's much easier to go to Bethel and worship God than it is to go down to Jerusalem. You don't want to walk that far, right? And the people of Israel were looking for ways to worship in which is more convenient. God's not interested in what's more convenient for you. That's a very shallow thing, right? What God is interested in is that not convenience, but obedience. And so don't seek God in Bethel because you won't find him there. Don't go to Gilgal. Do not journey to Beersheba, for Gilgal will surely go into exile and Bethel will be reduced to nothing. God is not in those places. And I'm just telling you that if you want to seek God, don't do it the same way that you've always done it before. What it means to seek God is to pick up his word and to read it, to start getting involved in churches and Bible studies and learn to live, because his word is what gives us life, right? There's another call. Verse 6 says, seek God and live. But this one comes with the warning of judgment. It says, or he'll sweep through the tribes of Joseph like a fire. It will devour them, and Bethel will have no one to quench it, right? You have an opportunity here. That's what he's saying. You have an opportunity. Just seek God. And if you seek God, there's a promise of life. But there's an or, right? There's another option. You could choose not to. And that comes with the promise of judgment. Who's this God that we're going to seek? I know a couple weeks ago there was some kind of star constellation thing that January was really interested in going and looking at. And I think it was when Jupiter and Mars or something was really close. Help me out, Craig. You care about these things. Yeah, Jupiter and Mars was really close. And January's like, let's go out and look at the stars. And so there we were, all bundled up on a cold night, freezing, me and Isaiah like this, and January's like looking up, and we see Orion's belt, and we see just the beauty of the stars. You can't look at those stars and think anything but, wow, what an amazing God, right? And so when Amos says, I need you to seek God and live, who's the God that we seek? Verse 8 says, he made the Pleiades and Orion, who turns midnight into dawn and darkness into night, who calls for the water of the sea and pours them out on the face of the land. The Lord is his name. Right? The God that we seek is the one that created Orion. He's the God of the heavens and the earth. He is the one who controls time. He turns darkness to day. Right? He is the one who pulls water from the waters of the sea and brings it down on the land. Who's his name? The Lord God Almighty. And if you really want to live, life is only found in the Lord God Almighty. You can't find life on your own. You can't do it in shallow ways. True life, abundant life, comes through Jesus Christ. True life comes through the Lord God Almighty. And the people of Israel didn't care so much about God. They worshiped in Bethel. They overdid their worship practices so that they could brag about them. The problem is they didn't care about justice. If you look at verse 7, it says, there are those who turn justice into bitterness and cast righteousness to the ground. So they may have done the right things in worship, right? But what did they lack? Justice. They may have done many of the right things in their practices, but what did they lack? Righteousness. They didn't live as if they really cared about the God that they were worshiping. See, we have to seek God to live. And Amos tells us what it means to seek God, because it's like I said, you can look at the book of Amos and God is revealed to you there. You can look at the person of Jesus and God is revealed to you there. But seeking God is actually something that we have to do. It's tangible as well. I mean, if you don't believe me, look at verse 10. It says, there are those who hate the one who upholds justice in the court and detest the one who tells the truth. The people of Israel would levy a straw tax on the poor and impose a tax on their grain. Therefore, though they have built stone mansions, they will not live in them. See, what's cheap is mud brick. What's expensive is stone mansions. And because they oppressed the poor, they weren't building their homes out of mud brick. No, they were building them out of stone because they took advantage of those who they thought were less than. And so verse 14 tells us what it means to seek God, right? There are those who hate truth, but verse 14 says, seek good and not evil. See, when we look at a tangible way of seeking God to live, it is found in the person of Jesus, but it also means that we have to seek good and not evil, which is a positive and a negative. By the way, we only have a definition of what good actually is because God gave us a standard, right? That's why we can say this is good and that's wrong. That's sin. And so when he's saying seek good and not evil, it's seek God, right? Like you're supposed to do the things that God has called you to do. Those are the good things. And stay away from the things that God has called you not to do. He's the definition of what good and evil is. So seek good and not evil that you may live, that the Lord Almighty will be with you just as you say he is. See, they claimed that God was with them, but their faith was shallow. They lacked justice. They had all the actions. Their heart was not right. Another positive and negative, he says, hate evil and love good. Maintain justice in the courts. Perhaps the Lord Almighty will have mercy on you. See, when I'm talking about seeking God to live, it does mean following the person of Jesus. It does mean giving your life over to him. But it also means having the same value system that he has. Loving good and hating evil. It means having the same moral compass that God gave us. Right? It's, in fact, with the people of Israel, it's often when they start following other gods that they change their view of what is right and what is wrong. That's maybe why, our country can get so in trouble sometimes. Because what they find most important, what they value the most is not God. And when people value something more than God, it shifts their moral compass. They no longer become people of justice or righteousness. So there's this challenge to us that we should seek God. And if we do that, maybe there's safety in that. Now, not so much for the people of Israel because we know the history here. We know that Assyria comes and they go into exile. And so they will end up dealing with that judgment. But this promise is for you today. Whatever it is that you're going through, if you seek God, you can live. And I got one more point. Give me a little bit of grace because it's almost 7. But my last point is this. There's no hiding behind a claim to faith without a lifestyle that shows it. That's my last point. You can't hide behind a claim to faith if your lifestyle doesn't show it. The people of Israel began to long for the day of the Lord. That's what verse 18 says. Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Maybe they longed for the day of the Lord because they misunderstood what Joel said when he says, anybody who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And they thought, well, all you have to do is call on the name. Maybe they longed for the day of the Lord because they thought, well, we're God's people, and the day of the Lord means judgment to them and mercy for us. And so it's a day of light and not of darkness. And so he says, woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Why do you long for the day of the Lord? That will be a day of darkness and not of light. See, they might have believed they were going to get away with something, but God's saying, no, you're not getting away with anything when the day of the Lord comes, because God is looking for genuineness in our faith, right? He's looking for a lifestyle that reflects what we actually say. That day, he says, and he puts it in this really comical way, he says it's going to be like a person who is able to flee from a lion, but then he runs into a bear. How lucky is that? You think you're going to get away with something. Oh, I got away with that. And then boom, there's a bear. Now, you might get away from the bear too, right? You might run into your home because that's a place of safety. But then you put your hand on the wall and a snake bites you. I'm pretty sure I don't want to live back what it was like back then, right? I'm not afraid of snakes being in my house. But that's what it's like. As though you enter your house and rested your hand on the wall only to have a snake bite you. Will not the day of the Lord be darkness, not light, pitch dark without a ray of brightness? Like, why would you look forward to the day of the Lord if your heart is not right? These people thought, well, because we're people of Israel, because we're children of Abraham, we're going to be safe. And that's not necessarily true. Because just because you can claim to have some type of faith, if your lifestyle doesn't show that or prove that, then there's going to be justice for you as well. And when I say justice there, I'm not talking about I'm talking about judgment, right? Because you can't, your lifestyle has to show what you actually believe. It has to prove it out. And so their heart isn't right. Verse 21 says, I hate and despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. See, they have the right gatherings, but God's not pleased with them because their heart is not right. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring me choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. I mean, really think about that. Just because you bring an offering of fellowship, what fellowship is there between light and darkness? What communion can God have with the people who might do the right things, but on the inside or the rest of the time in their life, they're oppressing other people. They're pressing people down. And this one stings me a little bit. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to them, to the music of your harps. These people had all the right things, but they weren't living a righteous lifestyle. They weren't people of justice, right? There are two words for justice in Hebrew. One is mishpat, and I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it has to do with like freedom to the oppressed, right? Like bringing peace, restoring peace. And the other one is din, almost like dinner, but just D-I-N. And that's also translated as justice, but usually it's always done by God, and it's usually translated into judgment. This has to do with God making things right in a very like you're going to get what you deserve because you oppressed, right? And then when verse 24, when he says, but let justice roll on like a river and righteousness like a never-failing stream, this is what's missing from their worship service. This is what's missing from their lifestyle. They have all the right actions, but they are not people of justice. They are not people who let righteousness flow from them like a stream. And so my question really is to us as we look at what Amos has to say to the people, the problem that he's encountering with Israel is they claim a faith that they don't actually live out. Right? They say that they are going to obey God, but they're building stone mansions for themselves while they're oppressing the poor. Right? That's what chapter 1 talks about. That they're stepping on the poor as if they're dust on the ground. See, God cares that you do the right thing, but he also cares that your lifestyle reflects what it is that you say you believe. You can bring the right offerings, but what fellowship is God going to have with people who don't have the same love and the same heart? And so my challenge to us as we wrap it up in a close is that, are you living a lifestyle that really proves what you say you are? Are you an authentic Christian when it comes to what you say and how you live? The people of Israel was not. And so they're going to not be able to escape judgment. I don't fear a snake. I don't fear a bear. I know that Jesus is covered, and I'm righteous because he has made me righteous. Knowing that means that I have to have the same heart, that I have to allow him to transform me, that I need to live Christ-like. And that's my goal, is to every day live Christ-like. And guess what? Every day I mess up. But I'm forgiven, and I try again, because God is a God of both justice and mercy. These people were fake. These people did the right things, but lived the wrong life.